The contract was for 18 months. I needed it. 3 years of postdoctoral work had left me with $72,000 in student debt and a permanent position nowhere in sight. The Arctic Research Station paid $45,000 plus housing and meals, and they'd hire someone with my CV: climate systems, atmospheric modeling, field instrumentation without much questioning. That should have been my first warning. The flight into Resolute Bay took 5 hours from Ottawa. I watched the landscape beneath the plane shift from forest to tundra to white, an irreversible gradient. I was thinking about the salary. I was thinking about the quiet of remote work. I was not thinking about why they needed someone badly enough to hire me sight unseen for a classified atmospheric project, nor why the posting had cycled through 6 candidates in 2 years. The station sat 40 kilometers northeast of the bay, accessible only by twin-engine helicopter in winter, by truck in the brief summer. I arrived in October, when the thermometer read -19 Celsius, and the sun had already begun its descent toward the polar night. The helicopter pilot, a taciturn man named Garrett, barely looked at me as he offloaded my 2 suitcases and a steel equipment trunk. "You'll want to check in at the main office," he said. "Second building, past the generator shed. They're expecting you." "How long does a rotation typically last?" I asked. He was already turning back toward the cockpit. "Until it doesn't," he said. "Or until someone leaves early. Depends." I never saw him again after that day. The station sprawled across a cleared plateau ringed by low hills and treeless tundra. 6 permanent structures: the main administrative building, a 3-story dormitory, a lab complex, a kitchen and common area, a storage shed, and a smaller building I later learned housed medical supplies and a radio room. All of them connected by enclosed corridors insulated against the cold. Beyond, the perimeter, at measured intervals marked by surveyors' poles, the landscape opened into white nothing. The administrator was a woman in her 50s named Dr. Sarah Chen. She had close-cut gray hair, calloused hands, and the look of someone who had made peace with loneliness. Her office was warm and smelled like instant coffee and paper. "Welcome," she said, sliding a folder across her desk. "Your credentials are excellent. We're glad to have you. I assume recruitment didn't tell you much about the posting." They said atmospheric research, climate modeling inputs, 3 years of data collection protocols. "That's accurate," Chen said. "The detail I need to add is that we operate under specific protocols here, not just for safety, though safety is part of it, but for efficacy. The work we're doing is sensitive. The environment we're in is unusual. Some of the rules we follow might seem excessive. I promise they aren't." She opened the folder. Single-spaced, 12 pages. The first page was titled Station Operating Procedures. Below that, in smaller print, read in full. Sign and date the last page. Ask questions after you've read it all. "I'll give you 2 hours," Chen said. "Read it in your quarters. There's a reading room on the 2nd floor, or you can go to your assigned room. Either way, take the time, then come back. We'll do a brief walkthrough." My room was number 237 on the 3rd floor of the dormitory. It was smaller than I expected: a single bed, a desk, a window that looked out onto tundra, and, far away, the shadowed bulk of hills. A radiator clanked in the corner, pushing heat from a system I could hear working somewhere in the building's depths. I sat on the bed and opened the folder. The document's first section outlined the station's purported mission: atmospheric composition sampling at high latitude, permafrost monitoring via core extraction, measurement of solar radiation and magnetic field variations. Standard climate research, expensive but legitimate, the kind of work that demanded isolation because equipment had to sit in precise locations for months, uncontaminated by air currents from civilization. Then the procedures section began. The first rule was numbered 1. It read, "All personnel must be within the enclosed corridors or designated interior spaces between the hours of 6:45 p.m. and 8:15 a.m. No exterior access during this window. No exceptions. No emergency exceptions. This is non-negotiable." Rule 2. The south-facing observation window in the third-floor corridor must be covered with its aluminum shutter between 7:35 p.m. and 3:10 a.m. every night. Failure to cover before 7:35 p.m. results in mandatory reset. Remain in the main common area until 6 a.m., then recover and wait until the next scheduled uncovering. Coverage must be checked by 2 personnel. 1 check is insufficient. Rule 3. No personnel may enter the sub-basement level designated as Storage Sector D. This includes maintenance staff. If equipment is needed from Sector D, submit a written request to Dr. Chen. Sector D is sealed. It will remain sealed. Rule 4. Radio communication with external parties occurs on Channel 6 only, between the hours of noon and 2 p.m., and between 6 and 8 p.m. All messages must be logged. All messages must be brief. Extended conversations are forbidden. If an external communication is received outside these windows, do not answer. Let it ring. Record the time and frequency in the radio log. Report the incident to Dr. Chen. Rule 5. The eastern corridor, past the laboratory on the first floor, terminates in a locked door marked Research Archive. This door will remain locked. Under no circumstances will you attempt to unlock it, prop it open, or inquire about its contents. If the door is found unlocked by anyone, the finder must immediately report it to Dr. Chen and retreat from the corridor. Do not re-enter until Dr. Chen has checked the room. Rule 6. All equipment inventories must be conducted at precisely 4:20 p.m. every afternoon. The counts must be exact. They must be logged. 3 persons will conduct each inventory in rotation. If a count varies by more than 2 units from the previous day's count, the discrepancy must be reported immediately. Do not assume loss or misplacement. Assume a counting error and recount. If the second count confirms the variance, report to Dr. Chen before 6 p.m. Rule 7. If you hear knocking at your door between the hours of 9 p.m. and 6 a.m., do not answer. Do not open the door. Do not acknowledge the sound. Continue with your activities as if nothing has occurred. After 6 a.m., if there is knocking, you may respond normally, but if the knock occurs between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m., absolute silence is required. Rule 8. No mirrors are permitted in personnel quarters. Mirrors in communal bathrooms must be covered with opaque tape between 8 p.m. and 7 a.m. Failure to cover mirrors results in a warning. A second failure results in reassignment to different quarters. A third failure results in immediate termination and evacuation. Rule 9. The kitchen prepares evening meals from 4 to 6 p.m. Dinner service ends at 6:30 p.m. No food is available after 6:30 p.m. This is strict. If you have not eaten by 6:30 p.m., you will not eat until breakfast at 7 a.m. Plan accordingly. Emergency rations are kept in the common area and may be accessed in case of illness, but not for convenience. Rule 10. Outdoor equipment, snowmobiles, sleds, surveying tools are stored in the equipment shed. No one may enter the shed between 5 p.m. and 7 a.m. Tools may be checked out between 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. If a tool is missing from inventory, the person who last used it must account for its location before the end of that day. Equipment does not leave the site. Equipment does not go missing. Rule 11. If you encounter another person outside the enclosed corridors during daylight hours, and that person does not greet you, do not greet them. Do not attempt to identify them. Avert your eyes and continue your work. If they are wearing a maintenance uniform and you do not remember them from the personnel roster, still do not greet them. Some visitors are expected, some are not. Do not engage with either. Rule 12. The heating system cycles through all sections of the station in a fixed pattern. Between 5 and 5:30 a.m., the heating in the laboratory sections is reduced by 40% for system maintenance and pressure redistribution. The temperature will drop noticeably. This is normal. Do not attempt to adjust the thermostat. Do not attempt to bypass the system. The cycle will resume at 5:30 a.m., and normal heating will restore by 6 a.m. Rule 13. Personnel conduct routine patrols of interior corridors once per 8-hour shift. Patrols must follow the marked route. Patrols must be clocked to take between 16 and 22 minutes to complete, including all checkpoint verifications. Variations outside this range must be explained and logged. Patrols do not cross through the Eastern Research Corridor. Patrols do not go down into the sub-basement. Standard route only. Rule 14. Radio checks must occur every 12 hours. On Channel 7, voice-only communication with the external repeater station at Mount Kelsey. Report only, the hour, your name, and all clear or equipment issue, non-urgent. These transmissions must be identical in phrasing. Do not deviate from the script. Radio checks are at 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. Failure to complete a radio check by 6:15 a.m. or 6:15 p.m. must be reported to Dr. Chen immediately. I finished reading at 4:12 p.m. I read the rules again. Then I read them a third time, trying to understand what climate research required this level of control. The document included a section on rationale and context, which explained that the station's isolation required strict protocols to maintain psychological stability and equipment integrity, that food schedules were necessary for resource management in a location where supply runs occurred only twice a month, that outdoor restrictions were standard in extreme environments, that radio discipline prevented crosstalk with other research teams. None of it made sense, but it was written in professional language, signed by Chen, dated to 3 months ago, and stamped with the official letterhead of the Arctic Research Consortium, an organization I'd heard of before, a legitimate entity that funded polar science. I signed page 12 and walked back downstairs. Chen was waiting in her office. I handed her the document. "Questions?" she asked. "Some of these seem extreme," I said. "Rule 8, the mirrors, why?" "Psychological isolation is the primary factor," Chen said. "Here, you're removed from normal society for 18 months. You'll sleep less, especially during the time of perpetual daylight in summer. You'll work in small groups with the same 6 people. Mirrors create a sense of artificiality in that environment. They fragment your sense of self. We remove them. Rule 3, Storage Sector D. What's stored there? Equipment we don't currently need. Backup generators, old instrumentation, supplies for rotation out. It's sealed to prevent accidental damage and to establish clear boundaries for where personnel should and shouldn't go. The station is large enough without exploring every corner, and the outdoor restriction from 6:45 p.m. to 8:15 a.m. Chen leaned back in her chair. The darkness is profound here. It will be complete within 3 weeks. If you go outside in that darkness without purpose, without equipment, you can become disoriented very quickly. We've had people walk 50 yards and suddenly not know where they were. We've had people wander in circles. The restriction ensures no one goes out in the dark unprepared. And after dark, no one is prepared, so no one goes. What about daylight? Rule 11, about not greeting people you don't recognize. We get occasional visitors from the external research teams, Chen said. Usually maintenance personnel from the equipment contractor, sometimes government personnel conducting audits. You won't know all of them. The rule prevents awkward interactions. If someone is here, they're authorized to be here. Your greeting or lack thereof doesn't matter. What matters is that you don't interfere with their work or theirs with yours. I wanted to believe her. The explanations were plausible. They just weren't true. I could feel it the same way an instrument can detect a frequency by its resonance. Some part of me recognized that these rules existed because something required them. "When do I start?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning. Orientation with the lab team at 7 a.m. Tonight, get some rest. Acclimate to the time zone. We're currently on Mountain Time, UTC -7, though the local time is almost irrelevant for the next 6 months. Eat dinner at 5:30 p.m. In the common area, you'll meet the staff. Then retire to your quarters. Tomorrow, the real work begins." Dinner was a kitchen-prepared beef stew with root vegetables and bread. The common area was a large, rectangular room with a long table, soft chairs, and a television tuned to a news feed from Edmonton. 3 other people were eating, 2 men and 1 woman, all wearing the navy blue insulated jackets the station provided. "You're the new atmosphere person," one of the men said. He was perhaps 40, with a weathered face and the bearing of someone who'd spent years in field work. "I'm Marcus. I oversee equipment maintenance." "David Park," I said. "Yes, atmospheric systems." "Welcome to the end of the world," said the woman. She was younger, maybe early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a pragmatic ponytail. "I'm Dr. Keiko Sato. I run the permafrost core analysis. We're going to see a lot of each other because your atmospheric data feeds into my models." The second man nodded but didn't introduce himself. He ate quickly and left without speaking. "Don't mind him," Keiko said. "That's James. He's the station's medical officer, and he prefers his own company. He's fine once you've been here a few weeks. The isolation hits different people different ways." "How long have you been here?" I asked. 14 months, Keiko said. 4 more to go. "It's not so bad once you settle into the rhythm. The rules seem strange at first, but they make sense once you understand that we're very, very far from anywhere that could help us." I ate in silence, trying to parse what she meant by that. Marcus talked about equipment maintenance schedules and the next supply run, which was due in 4 days. The news feed reported on federal politics and stock markets. Everything felt normal and profoundly wrong at the same time. At 6:15 p.m., Chen entered the common area and made an announcement. "Radio check time. Park, come with me. I want to show you the procedure." The radio room was a small space on the ground floor lined with communication equipment, a VHF radio mounted on the wall, a logbook on a shelf, a digital clock that read 6:14 p.m. Chen sat at the desk and picked up the handset. "Channel 7, she said, and adjusted the dial. Frequency readout, 163.975 megahertzes. At 6 p.m. and 6 a.m., we transmit. Watch." She keyed the microphone. Static cleared, then a slight hum. Mount Kelsey repeater. "This is Station Alpha, 6 p.m. Report. All clear." A pause. Then a response. Female voice, calm and professional. "Station Alpha, Mount Kelsey, 6 p.m. Report confirmed. All clear." "That's it," Chen said. "You'll do this twice a day. They expect the transmission between 6 p.m. and 6:15 p.m. and again at 6 a.m. to 6:15 a.m. If you miss the window, it triggers a concern protocol. The external station will attempt to reach us. If they can't, they'll file an incident report that starts a chain of notifications all the way up to the consortium director." "Why so rigid?" I asked. "Because out here, we're a dependent system," Chen said. "If we don't check in, the assumption is something is wrong. An accident, a fire, a medical emergency, a miscommunication. The radio check is our proof of life. It's the reason anyone knows we're still functioning." That night, I lay in my single bed in room 237 and listened to the station hum around me. The radiator clanked and hissed. The ventilation system whooshed air through ducts in the walls. Outside, the wind picked up. I could hear it against the window, a sound like pressure, like something pushing at the glass. I thought about Rule 7. If knocking came between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m., I was not to answer. I did not doubt, lying there in the dark, that something would knock. It wasn't a question of if, it was a question of when. I set my alarm for 6:30 a.m. and pulled the blanket over my head. The laboratory was a long room on the first floor with windows that faced south. Banks of equipment lined the walls: spectrometers, atmospheric samplers, data logging stations, calibration units. Keiko walked me through the setup at 7 a.m., showing me the routines I'd be running. "The station maintains 4 external sensor arrays," she explained, pointing at a map on the wall marked with colored pins. "Each array collects atmospheric data, pressure, temperature, particulate concentration, radiation levels. The data streams in through these receivers. She indicated a row of small boxes with LED indicators. You monitor the streams. If an indicator goes dark, you note it. If a stream shows significant variance from historical baseline, you note it. Every afternoon at 4:20 p.m., you and 2 rotating staff members conduct a full inventory of all equipment in here and in the specimen storage rooms. The counts have to match the prior day's count, or within 2 units maximum. What causes variances? I asked. Equipment failure, mostly. Drift from recalibration. Occasionally, physical damage from weather or animals. The sensor arrays are mounted 60 feet up on poles. Cormorants build nests. Eagles perch on the mounting hardware. Ice accumulates. You check the status logs and adjust accordingly. She showed me the data interface, a computer terminal with custom software that displayed real-time atmospheric readings. The baseline data was extensive. Months of pre-arrival measurements, detailed historical context, comparisons to other Arctic stations. The numbers scrolled constantly, updating every 2 minutes. During daylight hours, you're here from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., Keiko said. That's your primary shift. The evening shift from 4 to midnight is covered by rotating personnel. The overnight shift is minimal, just someone checking in at 6 a.m. for the radio call and monitoring overnight alarms. But you'll rotate into those shifts too. Everyone here covers everything. What's normal variance? I asked. Keiko pulled up a comparative graph. See this band? She traced a yellow highlighted region on the screen. Plus or minus 5% is within normal parameters for most measurements. Go beyond that, and you're looking at a genuine anomaly. Atmospheric composition, especially particulate matter, can swing outside normal without indicating equipment failure, but it gets noted separately. I spent the rest of the day reading logs and watching the data stream. Keiko left at noon for an outdoor survey, one of the last before the permanent darkness settled in, and I was alone in the laboratory. The equipment hummed. The data scrolled. The window showed the tundra landscape, empty and pale under the October sun, which hung low on the horizon and seemed to move very little across the sky. At 4:15 p.m., Marcus appeared in the doorway with a handheld scanner. Inventory time, he said. Ready? I grabbed the compet, printed checklist from the desk. We moved through the laboratory, and Marcus scanned each piece of equipment. The scanner read RFID tags embedded in the casing, and the device checked them against the master inventory in its database. I marked the checklist with the count. Spectral Analyzer Unit Number 1, present. Atmospheric Sampler Number 2, present. Calibration Standard Number 7, present. We went through the entire list, 43 distinct pieces of equipment across the laboratory and 2 adjacent specimen storage rooms. When we finished, the count was 43. The previous day's count, according to the inventory log, was 43. Perfect, Marcus said. Match. Into the log. I filled in the date and time on the inventory form and signed it. 4:23 p.m. That evening, I ate dinner with Keiko and Marcus. James was present but silent, eating mechanically and leaving as soon as he'd finished. The news feed played, and I noticed it was showing the same stories as the evening before. Different news cycles weren't reaching us, or were being deliberately looped. It was a small detail that added to the sense of separation. At 6 p.m., Chen made her radio check. I could hear her voice from down the hallway. Mount Kelsey repeater. This is Station Alpha. 6 p.m. report. All clear. The response came back the same as before. Calm, professional, confirming receipt. At 7:30 p.m., I remembered Rule 2 and went to the third-floor corridor. The south-facing window was a large pane of glass overlooking the tundra, now dark in the October evening. An aluminum shutter was mounted on the inside, hinged at the top. I pulled it down and secured the latch. It sealed with a click. Keiko appeared as I finished. First time? She asked. Yes. You'll get used to it, she said. In summer, when you have perpetual daylight, This is strange, you're blocking out the sun artificially. But once the darkness comes, you'll understand. You won't want to look out that window anyway. Why not? Because there's nothing to see, Keiko said, and what you imagine is worse than what's there. I went back to my room and read for an hour a novel I'd brought with me, a mystery set in New York City that felt impossibly distant and fictional. The radiator clanked. The wind picked up against the window, still visible above the desk, though the room around me was dark. I checked my alarm again and went to sleep early. Nothing knocked on my door that first night. The second day established the rhythm that would persist for the next 3 weeks. Rise at 6:30 a.m., shower, breakfast at 7 a.m., laboratory work from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., inventory at 4:20 p.m., dinner, evening activities until 9 p.m., retire to quarters. The rules regulated this cycle but didn't seem onerous. The window covering was automatic. The radio checks were brief. The outdoor restriction didn't matter because I had no reason to go outside. The locked doors were nothing. I passed by them without thinking about what lay beyond. On the third day, Keiko invited me to join her on an outdoor survey. She was collecting permafrost core samples from a location 2 kilometers northeast of the station. It was one of the last surveys before the darkness made fieldwork impossible. You should see the landscape while you can, she said. It'll contextualize the data you're collecting. Plus, outdoor time is good for your head. The Arctic morning was clear and cold, -21 Celsius on the thermometer. Keiko provided me with an insulated parka, snow boots, gloves, and a face mask. We checked out a snowmobile from the equipment shed and a hand auger from the tool inventory. At 8:30 a.m., we headed into the tundra. The landscape was flatter than I expected, dotted with low vegetation and rocky outcrops. The snow was thin, just a few centimeters from the first autumn frost, not yet the deep accumulation of winter. Keiko navigated by GPS and visual landmarks, pointing out the survey markers as we passed them. Colored stakes marked the borders of the research plot. We stopped at a specific location, coordinates 74.6827 degrees north, 95.0142 degrees west, according to Keiko's GPS unit, and she assembled the auger. It was a hand-powered corkscrew device with a T-handle at the top and a 4-inch bit at the bottom. She pressed it into the earth and began to turn it, using her body weight to drive the bit deeper. Permafrost starts at about 3 feet down, she said, breathing hard with the effort. We're pulling a half-meter core from below the permafrost table. It tells us how frozen it is, the ice content, historical layering, soil composition, all of that feeds into climate models. After 15 minutes of steady work, she extracted the auger and carefully eased out a cylindrical core of frozen earth. It was brown and gray, layered, studded with small rocks. She placed it in an insulated case, marked the location on her survey form, and we moved to the next point. We worked through the morning, collecting 5 cores, and by noon the sun was barely above the horizon. The landscape had taken on a strange quality, not quite dark, but deeply shadowed. The colors muted to grays and browns and pale blue. The wind had picked up, and I could see snow beginning to blow across the terrain. "Storm coming," Keiko said. "We should head back." "How can you tell?" The sky was clear. "The wind," she said. "The pressure. You'll learn to read it. Out here, the weather tells you everything if you listen, and right now, it's telling me to get back inside." We returned to the station at 1:30 p.m., beating a weather front that moved in by mid-afternoon. By evening, the wind was intense, rattling the windows and making the walls creak. The temperature dropped to -28. Chen announced at dinner that outdoor access was suspended until further notice. That night, for the first time, I heard the knocking. It came at 10:47 p.m., 3 firm raps on my door. I was still awake, reading in bed, and the sound made my heart jump. I lay still. My pulse accelerated. Another 3 raps, slightly harder. Rule 7 ran through my head. Do not answer. Do not open the door. Do not acknowledge the sound. I pulled the blanket over my head and continued reading. The words blurred. My hands shook slightly as I held the book. After perhaps 30 seconds, the knocking stopped. I heard footsteps in the corridor outside, slow and deliberate, moving past my room toward the far end of the floor. I did not sleep for the remainder of the techless night. I lay in the dark, listening to the wind and the station's mechanical systems, and I thought about what else was in the building with me. The weather persisted for 4 days. The wind reached speeds of 60 kilometers per hour. Snow accumulated around the exterior of the station in drifts that gradually covered the first-floor windows. The temperature bottomed out at -34 Celsius before recovering to -25, which it maintained for the duration of the storm. During this time, I experienced my first true adjustment to the rule's reality. The outdoor restriction became not just operational, but felt. You understood, watching the whiteness rage past the covered windows, why you would not go outside. You understood that the darkness and the wind were not obstacles to overcome, but absolute barriers. The confined space of the station became more pronounced. 3 floors of corridors, connecting rooms, a small laboratory, a kitchen, a common area. 6 people cycling through these spaces, their movements dictated by shift schedules and meal times and the rigid radio checks. On the 3rd day of the storm, at 4:20 p.m., Marcus and I conducted the inventory. The count in the laboratory was 39 instead of 43. 4 pieces of equipment were missing. "Recount," Marcus said immediately. We went through the list again, carefully, checking each tag against the physical location. The second count came back the same, 39. Marcus's face had gone pale. "That's not possible," he said. "Yesterday's count was 43. All accounted for." "What was the count the day before?" I asked. Marcus pulled the log back. 43. "And the day before that? 43. It's always 43. He left the laboratory without speaking and went directly to Chen's office. I waited in the lab, staring at the inventory checklist. 4 pieces of equipment, not large items, each was roughly the size of a briefcase or smaller. A backup atmospheric sampler, a primary calibration standard, 2 spectrometer modules. Chen arrived 20 minutes later with Marcus. She stood in the center of the laboratory and looked at me, then at the equipment, then at the inventory log. "Show me what's gone," she said. Marcus pointed out the mounting locations where each device should have been. The spots were empty, not even dust marks on the shelves, as if the equipment had been removed carefully and the surface wiped clean. "Has anyone other than you and David accessed this room in the past 24 hours? Chen asked. "No," Marcus said. "I locked the door myself yesterday after the inventory. David wasn't here. No one else enters the lab after hours unless I'm with them." Chen walked to the door. The lock was intact, no signs of forced entry. "Get James," she said to Marcus. "Tell him to come to my office after dinner. Both of you. Park, you too." That evening, the 3 of us sat across from Chen in her office. James looked agitated. Even by his standards, his jaw was tight, his eyes moving constantly. Marcus was upset. I was frightened. "The missing equipment," Chen said, "constitutes a minor loss relative to the station's inventory. But its disappearance is not minor. A locked room cannot simply lose equipment. Someone either unlocked it and removed the items, or the items were never there." "The inventory yesterday said 43. Marcus protested. "I'm certain of it." Chen opened the inventory log and ran her finger down the column. 4:23 p.m. Yesterday, Marcus scanned the room. 43 items logged. Signature here. She pointed to Marcus's handwriting. Today, same time, same procedure. 39 items. Difference of 4. "Could there be a scanning error?" I asked. "Maybe some equipment wasn't being registered yesterday?" "Possible," Chen said. "But the RFID tags are recent and functional. Marcus tests them monthly. If there was an error, it would be..." Consistent, we'd be seeing these same items dropped from the count regularly. This is a one-day variance. James spoke for the first time. There's another possibility. Someone took the equipment out and replaced it with something else. The scanner reads RFID tags. If someone swapped tags, we maintain a log of all RFID tags, Chen interrupted. The tags are in a sealed cabinet in my office. I check the seal daily. It hasn't been breached. Silence. So, what do we do? Marcus asked. We follow the protocols, Chen said. I'm issuing an amended equipment restriction. Effective immediately, the laboratory is locked after 4:30 p.m. No one enters without explicit permission from me. Marcus, you'll conduct all future inventories at 4:15 p.m. instead of 4:20 p.m. before my departure each day. You'll use me as your second witness, as per the standard procedure. Park, you'll conduct a secondary count independently the next morning at 7:30 a.m. before the laboratory becomes operational. This redundancy will catch any further discrepancies. What about the equipment? Marcus asked. Reported to the consortium, Chen said. They'll flag it as a supply loss. When the supply run arrives next week, we'll inventory incoming materials and correct the count. For now, we treat it as a system anomaly and move forward. After we left her office, Marcus pulled me aside in the corridor. That's not right, he said. Equipment doesn't just disappear, especially not when the door is locked and I have the only other key besides Chen. What are you saying? I asked. I'm saying someone has access to that room that isn't accounted for, he said, and I'm saying I want to know how. He walked away without waiting for a response. That night, the knocking came again, this time at 11:15 p.m., and it came with a voice. David, someone called through the door. It was my mother's voice, exactly as I remembered it. My mother, who had died 4 years ago. David, sweetie, can you open the door? I pulled the blanket over my head and pressed my hands over my ears. Rule 7. Do not acknowledge. Do not answer. The voice continued for another minute, my mother's voice, calling my name, pleading, and then stopped. I did not sleep. The storm ended on the morning of October 21st. The wind died suddenly, as if a switch had been flipped. The snow stopped. The sun, what there was of it, appeared pale and distant on the southern horizon. The station's exterior was heavily drifted. Chen announced that the supply run, scheduled for October 23rd, would proceed. Marcus was to lead an outdoor team to clear the landing area for the helicopter. I was not scheduled for the exterior work, but I volunteered to help. I needed to be outside, away from the station, away from the knocking and the impossible loss in the laboratory, at 8 a.m. Marcus, myself, and 2 other people, a maintenance technician named Michael, and a kitchen staff member named Sarah, went out with snow shovels and a small electric snowblower. The landing area was a flat section of tundra 40 meters east of the main building, marked with reflective poles every 10 meters. The snow was dense and heavy. We cleared it methodically, pushing it into low windrows around the perimeter. The work was physical and cold, but honest in a way that the station's interior was not. The landscape around us was empty and white and real. Strange place, Sarah said as we worked. She was younger, maybe mid-20s, with a pragmatic approach to the physical labor, but not the strangest I've been. I did a season in Antarctica. This is nothing compared to there. How long have you been here? I asked. 2 months, she said. Contract is 9 months. I'll be done in July. Can't wait. Has anything unusual happened? I asked carefully. She looked at me oddly. Like what? Anything that doesn't follow the normal procedures. She went back to shoveling. Everything here follows the procedures. That's the whole point. You follow the procedures, you survive. You don't. You don't. The landing area was cleared by noon. Chen inspected it, made measurements with a handheld GPS, and declared it acceptable. The helicopter was scheduled for 3 p.m., weather permitting. At 2:45 p.m., We were back inside, and the wind picked up again. Not a storm, just a gusty afternoon, the kind of weather that could ground a helicopter or make the landing dangerous. Chen was in the radio room, monitoring the weather report from Mount Kelsey. I heard her voice, "Copy. Visual confirmation when you have it." At 3:15 p.m., the helicopter appeared through the haze to the south. It descended toward the landing area, and Garrett, the same pilot from my arrival, maneuvered it down into the wind. The aircraft touched down hard, bounced once, and settled. Within minutes, he had shut down the engines. Chen met him at the door with a manifest. 3 new staff members were coming in. A replacement for James, who was rotating out after 28 months, a supply technician, and a new cook. 4 large sealed containers were offloaded: food, fuel, equipment replacements, mail. The entire transfer took 30 minutes. The new arrivals looked shell-shocked. I recognized the expression from my own arrival, the combination of relief at having made the journey and disorientation at suddenly being at the end of the world. The replacement medical officer, a man named Dr. Raymond Foster, was older, perhaps mid-60s, with gray hair and the bearing of someone who'd worked in Arctic medicine before. "Welcome," Chen said to him. "Your quarters are room 203. Let the day staff help you with your bags. Orientation tomorrow at 7 a.m. Dinner is at 5:30 p.m. James did not say goodbye to anyone. He loaded his personal belongings into a duffel bag, shook Chen's hand, and boarded the helicopter without comment. Within 10 minutes, the aircraft lifted off and became a speck in the gray sky. "So that's rotation," Marcus said beside me, watching the helicopter disappear. "Eventually, everyone leaves except Chen." "How long has Chen been here?" I asked. "Since the station opened," Marcus said. 7 years. She doesn't rotate. I think she literally can't leave." The new cook, a woman named Patricia, was efficient and quiet. By 5:30 p.m., dinner was hot and ready, despite the disruption. The supply technician, a younger man named David Chen, no relation to Dr. Sarah Chen, ate quickly and excused himself to begin the inventory process in the storage shed. Dr. Foster sat across from me and, "Keiko, first Arctic posting?" he asked me. "Yes," I said. "You've done this before?" "Fort McPherson, Northwest Territories," he said. 10 years ago, and Alert Station 5 years ago. I came back for this contract because they offered well, and because I missed it. There's something about the isolated work that appeals to me, the simplicity of it, the rules," I said. "Have you worked with rules like these?" Foster set down his fork. "What do you mean?" I hesitated. It seemed foolish to ask, and yet I needed to know if I was alone in finding them excessive. The outdoor restrictions, the window coverings, the specific times for meals and radio checks. It's very regimented. "Arctic stations are always regimented," Foster said. "When the margin for error is narrow, you narrow everything. But these rules do seem comprehensive. I was given a briefing materials packet, and I'll admit the procedures document is more detailed than Alert or Fort McPherson. But the Arctic adapts. We adapt to it. You get used to them." That evening, at 6 p.m., Chen made her radio check. The routine was unchanged. Mount Kelsey repeater, "This is Station Alpha, 6 p.m. Report, all clear." Response, "Station Alpha, Mount Kelsey, 6 p.m. Report confirmed, all clear." But something was different in Chen's voice. It had tightened slightly, as if she was holding something back. At 7:30 p.m., I covered the south window as directed. Keiko was there again, watching me finish the ritual. "It's darker now," she said. "Sun barely touches the horizon. Another 3 weeks, and it'll be below the horizon entirely. Then we have the polar night." "How long?" I asked. "November through January," Keiko said. 2 months of absolute darkness. It's strange the first time. The second time it's manageable. After that, it becomes the only reality you know, and daylight seems strange." That night, The knocking came at 9:52 p.m. This time, it was a different voice, my brother, who lived in Montreal and whom I hadn't seen in 2 years. "David, man, it's me. Let me in. I drove all this way. Open the door." I did not move. I lay in the dark and listened to my brother's voice calling through the door, explaining how he'd made the journey to the Arctic station, how unlikely that was, how impossible, and how I should let him in. It stopped after 3 minutes. I was beginning to understand that the knocking was a test of the rule. It was a way of seeing if I would break, and there was an intelligence behind it, something that knew my weak points, my vulnerabilities, the people I cared about most. It was learning me the way you learn the parameters of a system. The next day, October 24th, established a new pattern. Dr. Foster had read the procedures document and attended his orientation with Chen. He seemed unfazed by the rules. "I've worked under similar protocols," he said when we passed in the corridor. "Different framing, but the same structure. Isolation requires discipline." Keiko introduced me to Foster at lunch. She seemed relieved to have a new medical officer. James had been distant and unhelpful. "He had some issues," she said quietly. "Adjustment problems. Foster comes with better recommendations." At 4:15 p.m., Marcus and I conducted the inventory with Chen present as witness. The count was exactly 39, the same 4 items still missing, nothing recovered. "This is stable," Chen said, notating the results. "We'll maintain this count going forward. The equipment is recorded as lost and will be replaced in the next supply run." But something in her expression told me she didn't believe that. That evening, I asked to speak with her privately. "The equipment," I said in her office. "It didn't just disappear. Someone took it. Or something." Chen looked at me for a long moment. "What do you think happened?" "I don't know," I said. "But the rules, they're not just about maintaining discipline. They're about maintaining a boundary between us and something else." "That's an interesting interpretation," Chen said. "What do you base it on?" "The knocking," I said, "at night. It uses voices of people I know, and the rules specifically forbid acknowledging it. Why would that be a rule, unless that knocking was a known phenomenon? Unless the rule was designed to prevent a specific behavior?" Chen stood and walked to the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep purple. In another month, that sunset would be permanent. "Let me tell you something about this station," Chen said. "It was established 7 years ago as a climate research facility. The site was chosen because of its location in a transition zone between different Arctic climate systems. We're positioned between 2 major pressure systems, 2 circulation patterns. That makes the data we collect here valuable." "But?" I asked. "But the station has experienced some unusual phenomena," Chen said. "Unexplained equipment losses, anomalous readings in certain atmospheric measurements, instances of personnel experiencing hallucinations or psychological episodes that seem to correlate with specific times and locations." "What kind of anomalies?" "Pressure readings that don't match external measurements," Chen said. "Radio frequencies that receive signals that aren't being transmitted. Footsteps recorded in areas that are sealed and unoccupied. A map in the storage area that seems to expand or contract its dimensions, depending on when it's measured. Temperature fluctuations that violate thermodynamic principles." She turned to face me. "The rules were designed by researchers before me to create a structure that minimizes exposure to these anomalies, not because we understand them, but because following the rules seems to correlate with safety. When someone breaks a rule, things get worse. When people follow them precisely, things remain stable." "What happens to people who break the rules?" I asked. "They leave," Chen said. "Or they can't. The rotation schedule has unusual turnover. People request emergency evacuation. One person 2 years ago was found attempting to dig through a sealed wall in Storage Sector D, He was evacuated by emergency helicopter with psychological breakdown diagnosis. What do you think is in Sector D? I don't know, Chen said. I've never been down there, and I don't intend to. The previous station director left strict instructions that it remain sealed. I honor that instruction. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you're beginning to understand, Chen said. And because you're going to need to maintain discipline. The rules will become harder to follow as the darkness deepens. The knocking will become more sophisticated. It will adapt to you. But if you maintain the boundaries the rules establish, you'll survive your rotation. If you don't, you won't. The transition into polar night accelerated. By the end of October, the sun barely rose above the horizon. And by November 1st, it did not rise at all. The station shifted into twilight mode. The sky lightened to a deep blue or purple in the afternoon, then darkened again. The darkness was profound and complete. With the darkness came changes. The knocking intensified and varied. Sometimes it was voices I knew. Sometimes it was the voices of people I'd never met, but whose names I could somehow identify. Sometimes it was knocking without voices, just the repetitive tap-tap-tapping that went on for minutes. The rules now felt essential. Rule 1, no exterior access. Between 6:45 p.m. and 8:15 a.m. became absolute. The thought of stepping outside in that darkness was genuinely terrifying. The landscape beyond the station was not just dark but actively hostile. I could sense it through the walls, through the windows I did not open. Something was out there, something that had learned to use voices to call us out. The inventory discrepancies became a secondary anomaly. 4 items remained missing. Nothing new disappeared, but the missing items were never recovered. David Chen, the supply technician, conducted a thorough audit of the entire storage system and found everything else accounted for. It was only those 4 atmospheric instruments that had vanished completely. At a staff meeting in early November, Chen announced a new protocol. We're implementing mandatory group occupancy during evening hours, she said. Between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m., all personnel will remain in the common area or with at least one other person. No, one works alone or occupies a single room during this window. Why? Patricia asked. Psychological stability, Chen said. Research indicates that isolation intensifies during the transition into polar night. Group presence reduces anxiety and provides mutual safety. No one mentioned the knocking. The rule was understood implicitly. The common area became a gathering space. We read, talked, watched movies that had been loaded onto the station's server before the supply run. Foster was quiet but observant. David Chen, the supply tech, spent most of his time with charts and equipment logs. Patricia prepared the next day's meals. Marcus worked on maintenance reports. Keiko and I often sat together, analyzing data or discussing research. One evening in early November, Marcus pulled me aside. "Have you noticed Foster?" he asked quietly. "What about him?" "He knows things he shouldn't know," Marcus said. "Details about the station, about what happened before." I asked him casually about the previous medical officer, and he gave me information that wasn't in any briefing. Specific dates, specific incidents. "Maybe he was debriefed extensively," I said. "Maybe," Marcus said. "Or maybe he's worked here before and no one mentioned it." I thought about confronting Chen, but something stopped me. Foster seemed fine. His presence was calming, actually. He'd worked Arctic stations. He understood isolation. He didn't push boundaries. Maybe his knowledge wasn't suspicious at all, but I noted it. I noted everything now. The station was becoming an environment where details mattered, where the smallest inconsistency could indicate a problem. We were training ourselves to be observers, to see patterns and threats before they manifested. At 6 p.m., Chen made her radio check. Mount Kelsey repeater. "This is Station Alpha. 6 p.m. report. All clear." Response. "Station Alpha, Mount Kelsey. 6 p.m. Report confirmed. All clear." At 6 a.m., the same pattern. Mount Kelsey. Repeater. "This is Station Alpha. 6 a.m. Report. All clear. Response. Station Alpha, Mount Kelsey. 6 a.m. Report confirmed. All clear. These twice-daily confirmations were our connection to the outside world. They were the proof that we still existed, that someone was monitoring our status. I began to understand why they mattered so much. Without them, we would be completely alone. By mid-November, I had been at the station for 6 weeks. The polar night was absolute. The sun did not rise. The sky was dark, though not uniformly, so there were gradations of darkness, from deep blue at the southern horizon to black overhead, and the stars were impossibly bright. The temperature settled at -32 Celsius and remained there. The laboratory data showed interesting anomalies. The atmospheric composition was shifting slightly, nothing dramatic, but measurable. Particulate concentration had increased by 4%. Pressure readings were holding steady, but with minor oscillations that corresponded to nothing in the external weather patterns. "It's like the atmosphere is breathing," Keiko said as we reviewed the data one morning. "Pressure in, pressure out, on a cycle that has nothing to do with weather systems." I checked the log against historical data. This pattern had appeared before, I found, 4 months ago, according to the previous operator's notes. 2 months before that, it was a 6-week cycle, like clockwork. "Did they investigate this?" I asked Keiko. "According to the notes, they observed it and documented it," Keiko said. "But since it didn't trigger equipment failure or safety concerns, it was filed and ignored. The working hypothesis was that it's some kind of local Arctic phenomenon specific to this location. But I didn't believe that. The cycle was too regular. It was too much like a pattern, like a rhythm, like something breathing in and out. I mentioned it to Foster over dinner. "Interesting observation," he said. "You might be picking up on a real phenomenon or a measurement artifact. Did you check for instrumental drift?" "The instruments were recalibrated 3 weeks ago," I said. "Standard protocol. Everything checked out." "Then you've got either a real atmospheric cycle or a systematic error in your data pipeline," Foster said. "Both are worth investigating." He said it conversationally, with no particular emphasis. But something in his expression suggested he already knew what the cycle was, or at least, what it meant. That night, the knocking came with a new element. It started as usual, voices calling through the door, but this time there was physical pressure. The door handle moved, as if someone on the other side was trying to turn it. The deadbolt held. Rule 7 said do not answer. It said do not acknowledge. It didn't say anything about the door itself. I checked the bolt was secure and tried to return to sleep, but the handle continued to turn, back and forth, as if someone was experimenting with it, testing it. Then there came the sound of fingers on the door frame, dragging downward from top to bottom, leaving scratches. I pulled the blanket over my head and counted my breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth, count to 4 each way. By the time I reached 100 cycles, the sound had stopped. But I didn't sleep. In the first week of November, Chen issued the first amended rules document. It added 6 new operational constraints to the original 14. Amendment Rule 1. The heating cycle in the laboratory sections will change effective immediately. The reduced temperature period will now extend from 5 a.m. to 5:45 a.m., a 15-minute extension from the original protocol. During this window, the temperature will drop to approximately 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Do not enter the laboratory. Do not attempt to check on equipment. Wait until normal temperature restoration at 6 a.m. Amendment Rule 2. Radio check procedure now requires the transmission of a secondary confirmation code. After confirming all clear, transmit your employee identification number. Failure to include this code will result in a request for retransmission. This is mandatory, not optional. Amendment Rule 3. The inventory process will be expanded to include a shadow count. After the 4:20 p.m. inventory is completed, David Chen will conduct an independent verification count. The results must match exactly. Any discrepancy will trigger an immediate recount. If any count varies by more than 0 units, no variance is permitted. The discrepancy must be reported within 5 minutes. Amendment Rule 4. No mirrors are permitted in any location in the station. This expands the original bathroom rule. All mirrors, including those in private quarters, must be removed and stored in the sealed cabinet in Chen's office. Any mirror remaining after November 8th will result in immediate termination and emergency evacuation. Amendment Rule 5. The south-facing window covering ritual will change. The window must now be covered by 6:45 p.m., a full hour earlier than the original 7:35 p.m. requirement. Additionally, a second window on the second-floor eastern corridor must also be covered between 6:45 p.m. and 3:35 a.m. Failure to cover both windows will trigger reset protocol. Amendment Rule 6. Personnel are prohibited from discussing, describing, or speculating about the nature of the phenomena occurring at the station. Violations of this rule will result in immediate psychological evaluation and potential evacuation. This includes private conversations between staff members and entries in personal journals. The station maintains the right to review all written materials kept on site. The last amendment made it clear what was happening. We were being silenced, not explicitly forbidden from acknowledging the knocking or the impossible events, but prohibited from discussing them, which meant Chen knew we were experiencing them, and the rule was designed to prevent information from spreading, to prevent people from building on each other's fears or observations. That afternoon, Marcus confronted me in the storage shed. "This is insane," he said. "They're telling us we can't talk about what's happening. That means they know something's happening. That means it's happening to everyone. The rule might be precautionary," I said, though I didn't believe it. "Precautionary against what?" Marcus demanded. "Against us supporting each other? Against pooling observations? They're isolating us from each other while we're already isolated from the world." He was right, but saying so felt dangerous. Amendment Rule 6 was a cage that restricted not just our behavior but our cognition. If we couldn't discuss the phenomena, we couldn't validate our experiences. We couldn't distinguish between shared reality and individual hallucination. We were being atomized. Over the next 3 days, each of us, Keiko, Patricia, David Chen, Foster, and I received individual summons to Chen's office. She interviewed us privately about our adjustment to station conditions. She asked us about sleep, about mood, about any psychological concerns. When it was my turn, she was direct. "Have you experienced audio phenomena during evening hours?" she asked. I hesitated. Amendment Rule 6 forbade discussion of phenomena. But this was the administrator asking. This was a direct question. "Yes," I said. "Voices?" "Yes. Voices of people I know." "Have you responded?" "No." Following Rule 7. Chen nodded. "Good. The phenomena tend to intensify around the transition into deep polar night. They should stabilize after the winter solstice, around December 21st. In the meantime, maintaining absolute adherence to the rules is essential. The rules are the boundary. Breaking them extends the phenomena. Following them contains it. "What is it?" I asked. "What's making the knocking? What's out there?" "I don't know," Chen said, "and I don't want to know." Knowledge increases curiosity, and curiosity breaks rules. Remain incurious. Follow the procedures. Survive the rotation. The 6 weeks of November were the longest of my life. The darkness was continuous and complete. The sun did not rise. The station's interior lighting became the only reality. Artificial and constant, the rules multiplied in practical ways. Chen added Amendment Rules 7, 8, and 9 by mid-November, refining and constraining every aspect of our behavior. Amendment Rule 7 required that all personnel sleep between the hours of 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. Voluntary departure from quarters during this window was not permitted. This was ostensibly to manage heating costs and maintain a stable sleep schedule, but what it actually meant was that no one could move around the building after dark. Everyone was confined to their room. The knocking adapted. It became more frequent and more sophisticated. Whoever or whatever was doing the knocking learned my brother's voice well enough to impersonate not just his tone, but his specific phrases, his laugh, his manner of speaking. It called out conversations we'd had. It described events only my brother would know about. It begged me to open the door. I maintained Rule 7. I did not answer. I did not open the door. I lay in the darkness and listened and endured. The inventory count remained at 39 items. No further losses occurred. But by Amendment Rule 3, the inventory process had become a Byzantine ritual. 4:20 p.m. primary count, immediately followed by David Chen's independent verification count. Both had to match exactly. Both had to be documented and signed by 3 witnesses. The process took 45 minutes and left everyone exhausted. Foster began to strike me as increasingly strange. He was competent and helpful, but he never participated in the evening common area gathering. He ate meals with us but contributed little to conversation. And I began to notice that on some mornings, he looked like he hadn't slept. His eyes were dark, his movements slow. One evening, I asked Keiko about him. "I think he's heard the knocking too," she said quietly, "but he's better at handling it than we are. Or maybe he's experienced it before, at another station, and he's developed coping mechanisms. What if he's one of them?" I said, then immediately regretted it. Keiko's face went still. "Amendment Rule 6, she said. "We're not supposed to discuss this." "I know." "Don't," Keiko said. "Don't go down that path. Because if you can't trust Foster, then you can't trust anyone, including me, including yourself. That's how it destroys you, by making you paranoid, by making you unable to form connections. That's when you break the rules." She was right. I stopped questioning Foster. I pushed the suspicion away. By November 28th, the atmospheric cycle Keiko and I had identified had become more pronounced. The pressure oscillation was increasing in amplitude. The particulate concentration was rising now 8% above baseline. The atmospheric composition was becoming unstable. "Something's changing," Keiko said as we reviewed the data at the morning briefing. "The trend is accelerating. If it continues, we might be looking at actual equipment threshold crossings by the winter solstice." "Should we report this?" David Chen asked. "To who?" Chen said. "To the consortium? They're months away from being able to respond. This is baseline measurement. We document it, and we maintain operations." But I could see the tension in her jaw. She knew something was coming. The data was showing it clearly. Whatever was causing the atmospheric anomalies was building toward something. The 6-week cycle that Keiko and I had identified was approaching its peak. That night, the knocking came with a different voice entirely. Not my brother, not my mother, but my own voice. A perfect recording of me, speaking words I'd spoken weeks ago, before I arrived at the station. The voice was coming from inside my head somehow. Not just from the hallway, but from everywhere, as if it was emanating from the walls themselves. I covered my ears. The voice continued. It was reciting my own thoughts, moment by moment, describing my internal experience. It knew about my debt, about my desperation for the job, about my fear of failure. It knew about my suspicion of Foster. It knew about every doubt and every moment of weakness. I rolled out of bed and looked at the door. Through the peephole, I could see the hallway was empty. Nothing was in the corridor. But the voice continued, perfectly imitating my own patterns of speech, my own inflections. Rule 7 held me. I did not answer. I did not open the door. I sat on the edge of my bed and endured it until the voice stopped at 5:58 a.m. When I went to breakfast, Foster was already at the table. He looked at me, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker in his expression. Recognition, understanding. He knew what I'd experienced. In the final week of November, 3 things happened in rapid succession. First, Chen issued Amendment Rule 10. It stated that all electronic locks in the station would be retrofitted with additional security protocols. No one could enter any locked room without explicit authorization from Chen. This included the research archive, Sector D, and Chen's own office. The keys were being removed. Everything would be electronic access only. Why? Marcus asked at the staff meeting. Increased security protocols, Chen said. Standard practice as we enter the more isolated period of the year. Second, the atmospheric data surged past all thresholds. The pressure oscillation was now 22% higher than baseline. Particulate concentration jumped to 18% above normal. Temperature readings were varying by 6 degrees Celsius every 4 hours, which should have been impossible given stable atmospheric conditions. This is equipment failure, I said to Keiko. Multiple sensors are going wrong at the same time. That's not a coincidence. Or the atmosphere really is doing this, Keiko said, and our instruments are accurately detecting it. We scheduled a calibration check for the external sensor arrays, but Rule 1 prohibited any exterior access after 6:45 p.m., and the arrays would require daylight or at least twilight to reach safely. We'd have to wait until December, when the sun's position relative to the horizon shifted slightly. Third, and most alarming, James appeared. James had been evacuated on October 23rd with the helicopter rotation. He had left the station and not returned, yet at 2 p.m. On November 29th, I saw him in the second-floor corridor. He was wearing the same station-issued jacket he'd worn when he left. His face was pale, almost gray. He was moving slowly, deliberately, in a way that suggested great effort. I stopped in my tracks. Rule 11 said do not greet people you didn't recognize, but I recognized James. I knew him. He did not acknowledge me. He walked past without meeting my eyes, moving toward the stairwell with that strange, deliberate gait. I went immediately to Chen's office and reported it. "Are you certain?" Chen asked. "Absolutely," I said. James, the medical officer who rotated out. He was here in the corridor at 2 p.m. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood and left the office without speaking. Within an hour, all personnel were summoned to a general meeting. Chen stood in front of us in the common area. "Effective immediately. New quarantine protocols are in effect," she said. "All personnel must report any sightings of unfamiliar individuals to me directly. Such sightings are not to be discussed with other staff members. Do not approach any unfamiliar persons. If you encounter someone in a corridor, back away and report the encounter to me." "What do you mean, unfamiliar?" Patricia asked. "I mean anyone you do not recognize," Chen said. "Anyone whose presence seems incorrect, anyone who does not respond when greeted. Report them." "What if we're mistaken?" David Chen asked. "You won't be," Chen said. She dismissed the meeting without further explanation. That evening, in the common area, the atmosphere was tense. No one spoke about what had happened. Amendment Rule 6 prohibited discussion of phenomena, but everyone knew something had escalated. At dinner, Foster sat beside me. "How many?" he asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "How many what?" I replied. "Entities," he said. "How many have you seen or heard of?" I hesitated. Amendment Rule 6. But Foster was asking directly, and there was something in his tone that suggested he genuinely needed to know. "Just the one," I said. "James. But the knocking is different now," Foster finished. "It's not just voices, it's presences. It's learning the building." "What is it?" I asked. Foster looked around to make sure no one was in earshot. "I worked at Alert Station for 14 months, he said, "and I worked here before, 3 years ago, for a 4-month contract. I left due to medical reasons. What I really did was run, because I saw something I couldn't rationalize. I saw a person in a place where a person couldn't be. I saw the same thing happen to someone else, and I watched the rules keep us safe." "Safe from what?" "From it," Foster said. "From whatever is out there, or in here, or both. I don't have a framework for understanding it. Neither do you. The rules are the framework. They work because they work. Don't question them. Don't break them. Don't try to understand. Just comply. He got up and left the common area, leaving me alone with my food and my mounting dread. The first week of December brought the nearest thing we experienced to a collective crisis. The atmospheric data had become incomprehensible. The pressure oscillations were violating basic physical law. Particulate concentration had exceeded the sensor's maximum range multiple times. Temperature readings were unstable and erratic. It was as if something was genuinely happening in the atmosphere above us, something that the instruments were detecting but that had no conventional explanation. On December 3rd, Keiko called me to the laboratory at 6 a.m. with urgency in her voice. "Look at this," she said, pointing at the data display. 4 a.m. to 4:30 a.m. 17 hours ago, the sensor array went completely dark. All 4 external receivers dropped signals simultaneously. "Equipment failure?" "All 4?" Keiko said. "At the same time?" "No." And they came back online at exactly 4:31 a.m. In the interim, data collection was interrupted, but the data stream itself didn't stop. It went to 0 across all readings, which means the system was responding. It was just reporting nothing, a complete null reading from the environment. I looked at the logs. She was right. The sensors had gone completely dark for 31 minutes, then resumed normal operation. There was no explanation. The external weather station had reported no system failures. The only record was the 0 reading. "What does that mean?" Keiko asked. "I don't know," I said, "but I'm going to recommend we conduct a physical check on the sensor arrays. The equipment might be physically compromised, but we couldn't check the arrays without a daylight expedition, and daylight was nearly non-existent. The sun was now permanently below the horizon, and even the twilight period of October and November was gone. We were in absolute darkness. That evening, Chen called me to her office privately. "The sensor data," she said. "It's concerning you." "It's impossible," I said. "Physically impossible." "No," Chen said. "It's possible. Just not in any physics framework that we teach in universities. Something is happening at this location that violates our understanding of atmospheric composition and behavior. It has been happening since the station opened. It intensifies during the polar night. It reaches a peak around the winter solstice. The winter solstice is in 2 weeks." "I know," Chen said. "The rules are designed to protect us through that period. The data suggests the phenomenon builds to a maximum around December 21 through 23rd, then begins to recede. We maintain strict protocol during that window. We follow every rule precisely. We maintain discipline. And what happens if we break a rule during that period?" I asked. "Someone dies," Chen said flatly. "Or someone disappears. Or someone comes back wrong, the way James came back. We maintain the rules. That's all we can do." By December 10th, it was clear something was accelerating. The knocking came multiple times a night now. The voices had expanded beyond people I knew. They were now voices of people who didn't exist. Composite fabrications of speech patterns designed to be maximally confusing and disorienting. Marcus broke on December 11th at 4:37 p.m., just 17 minutes after the 4:20 p.m. inventory. He went to the locked door that led to Research Archive. He took a fire extinguisher from the wall and began trying to smash the electronic lock. "It's in there," he screamed at the door. "It's all in there. Everything we need to know. Chen's lying. This entire operation is a lie." Foster and I subdued him. It took both of us. Chen arrived within a minute, and she looked at Marcus with something close to pity. She said quietly, "Medication and rest." She had Foster escort Marcus to the medical quarters. Marcus was sedated and placed in observation. For the next 3 days, he remained in the medical wing, drugged and compliant. But before he was sedated, I heard him muttering to himself, and some of what he said penetrated the noise of his breaking mind. 4 weeks into the rotation, James said, "The knocking starts the 3rd week. Said you have to maintain discipline. Said someone breaks every rotation. Said the previous occupant of my room left the message carved into the underneath, the bed frame. Chen heard it too. I saw her react, saw her move quickly to ensure Marcus was fully sedated. That night, I checked under my bed frame. In the darkness, my fingers found grooves in the wood, carved words. I didn't have a light that reached that far back, so I traced the letters with my fingertips. It took me several minutes to decode it. They learn you. Never open, rotate out, or break. Choose one. No signature, no date, but I understood this was a message from someone in my exact position, someone who had occupied this room, someone who had experienced what I was experiencing, someone who had, presumably, made a choice. The 12 days before the winter solstice were the hardest. The knocking came constantly now, not just at night, but at all hours. The voices had become almost unbearably intimate. They knew things about me that I had never told anyone. My fears, my doubts, my moments of shame. They knew my internal dialogues, my private arguments with myself, my moments of weakness. They impersonated me so perfectly that I began to doubt whether I was actually thinking or whether something else was simulating my thoughts. The atmospheric data reached the point of complete unintelligibility. The sensors were reporting readings that oscillated, wildly pressure that went negative for no physical reason, temperatures that fluctuated between -50 and +20 Celsius multiple times per hour, particulate concentrations that exceeded 500% above baseline. "It's not measuring the atmosphere anymore," Keiko said at a briefing. "It's measuring something else. Or the atmosphere has become something else." "Keep documenting," Chen said. "Analysis is secondary to documentation." The inventory ritual had become exhausting. By Amendment Rule 3, we were now conducting 3 separate counts: the 4:20 p.m. primary, David Chen's independent verification, and a secondary check initiated by Chen herself at 4:45 p.m. The counts had to match exactly to the previous day. Any variance triggered an immediate recount. On December 18th, David Chen reported a discrepancy. The count came back at 38 instead of 39. One item had disappeared. We recounted immediately. Still, 38. Chen made us recount a third time. 38 again. "Something is leaving," Keiko said quietly, and her voice was the first person other than Foster to name what was happening. "Something is taking things." Amendment Rule 6 prevented us from discussing it further, but everyone understood. The phenomenon that was causing the knocking, that was manifesting as James in the corridors, that was learning us through the voices, it was interacting with our reality in tangible ways. It was affecting matter. It was taking things. Chen issued Emergency Protocol 1 that evening. The emergency protocols were the rules designed to handle crises. I'd read them when I arrived, filed them away as contingencies I hoped never to need. Now Chen was activating one. Emergency Protocol 1 read, "In the event of equipment losses exceeding nominal baseline, the station enters lockdown mode. All personnel remain in designated interior spaces. No movement between zones without direct supervision by Dr. Chen. All exterior sensors are disabled to prevent interference. The laboratory remains operational for essential data collection only. All recreational activities cease. All evening common area gatherings are suspended. Personnel sleep in assigned quarters and remain there outside of designated work hours. This protocol remains in effect until equipment loss ceases or until Dr. Chen determines threat level has diminished. The lockdown isolated us further. The common area gatherings, which had been our primary way of maintaining sanity through the polar night, stopped completely. We worked our shifts, ate in the kitchen, and retreated to our rooms. Movement through the corridors became hurried and purposeful. We avoided lingering in common spaces. On December 19th, I heard a voice in the walls. Not the knocking at the door, but something between the walls themselves, a sound like breathing, but with words wrapped inside it. The words were fragments of conversation, pieces of my own voice, but rearranged, remixed into something alien. That was when I understood. The The thing wasn't trying to break the rules and get me to open the door. It didn't need me to open the door. It was inside already. It had been inside since before I arrived. It was learning the station the way it was learning me. It was understanding how the place worked, how the people worked, what the boundaries were, and it was probing them, testing them, finding the weak points. The knocking on the door was a decoy, a distraction. It was making us focus on the external threat while the actual threat was already internal. I wanted to tell Chen, but Amendment Rule 6 forbade it. I wanted to tell Foster, but I wasn't certain I could trust him. I wanted to tell Keiko, but the isolation made communication feel dangerous, so I maintained discipline. I followed the rules. I worked the inventory, attended my shifts, took my meals, and returned to my room. On December 20th, the day before the winter solstice, something changed in the building's structure. I was walking through the first-floor corridor on my way back from breakfast when I noticed that the hallway was longer than it had been before. Not significantly longer, maybe an extra 10 feet, but noticeably so. I marked the discrepancy in my mind and checked it on the return walk. The corridor was its normal length again. I mentioned it to Keiko. "The building is shifting," she said. "Thermal expansion from heating cycles, probably. The metal frame contracts and expands." But we both knew that wasn't true. Metal doesn't shift that dramatically. And the shift had been in the middle of the day, not during the heating cycle transitions. At 6 p.m., Chen made the radio check. Her voice was different, controlled but strained. "Mount Kelsey repeater, this is Station Alpha, 6 p.m., report, all clear." There was a pause, longer than usual. Then the response came back. "Station Alpha, Mount Kelsey, 6 p.m., report confirmed, all clear." But the voice was slightly distorted. The inflection was off. For just a moment, I wondered if the thing on the other end of the radio was really Mount Kelsey, or if something had learned the protocol and was impersonating it. I didn't mention this to anyone. The winter solstice fell on December 21 at 3:28 p.m. The sun reached its lowest point in the sky below the horizon, of course, but as low as it ever went before beginning its slow arc back toward the north. Chen issued Emergency Protocol 2 that afternoon. During the solstice window, December 21 through December 23, all hours, personnel must remain in designated safe zones. Safe zones are the common area, the dining facility, and assigned private quarters. No movement through other corridors. All exterior sensing systems remain offline. The laboratory is closed. The radio room is sealed. All essential personnel, those required for 6 a.m. radio check, will be escorted to the radio room by Dr. Chen at 5:45 a.m. precisely. All other personnel remain in safe zones. The safe zones felt like a cage. The common area and dining facility were connected but small. We were confined to perhaps 1/10 of the station's total space. The rest of the building was off limits. "Why?" Patricia asked. "What's happening?" "Precautionary," Chen said. "The solstice creates specific environmental conditions. We're reducing variables." That evening, at 9 p.m., the knocking became something else entirely. It wasn't knocking anymore. It was the sound of something moving through the building. Footsteps, multiple sets of footsteps, moving through the corridors, crossing back and forth in patterns that seemed almost choreographed. I could hear them from my room. They moved down the hallway, up the stairs, through what sounded like the laboratory, back down, across, up again. There were at least 3 separate entities. They moved in silence most of the time, but occasionally one of them would vocalize a sound that wasn't quite speech, a kind of harmonic resonance that made the walls vibrate. And beneath it all, I heard a sound like wind, a sound like the Arctic wind outside, but coming from inside the walls, as if the pressure differential between inside and outside had somehow inverted, and the exterior environment was beginning to bleed through. At 6 a.m., Chen came to my door personally to escort me to the radio room. She was in full, cold-weather gear, parka, gloves, face mask, though we were inside and the temperature was normal. "Don't look out the windows," she said. I didn't ask why. I just followed her through the corridors. In the radio room, Foster was already there, along with David Chen. The radio equipment was set up, but the windows were covered with heavy blankets. The small room felt claustrophobic. Channel 7, 6 a.m. Report, Chen said, her voice muffled slightly by the face mask. She keyed the microphone. Mount Kelsey repeater, this is Station Alpha, 6 a.m. Report, all clear. The response came back immediately, but the signal was degraded. It broke up, reformed, broke up again. The voice on the other end was almost indecipherable. Station Alpha, Mount Kelsey, 6 a.m. Report, confirmed. All clear. Chen repeated the transmission. Mount Kelsey repeater, this is Station Alpha, 6 a.m. Report, all clear. This time, the response was clearer. Station Alpha, Mount Kelsey, 6 a.m. Report confirmed. All clear. Chen signed off and shut down the radio equipment. We leave now, she said, back to the common area immediately. As we walked through the corridors, I could hear the footsteps again. They were closer now, moving in coordinated patterns, sometimes crossing our path ahead of us, sometimes moving parallel to us in adjacent corridors. We didn't encounter anything visually, but the presence of multiple entities was undeniable. Back in the common area, all personnel were accounted for. Keiko, Patricia, David Chen, Foster, myself, and Chen. Marcus was still in the medical wing, sedated. We maintain position, Chen said. No one leaves this space. Food is available in the dining facility through that door. Bathrooms are available on this level only. You remain here until I tell you otherwise. How long? Keiko asked. Until the solstice window closes, Chen said. December 23rd at midnight. That was 3 days away. The 3 days were the most difficult stretch of my life up to that point. We occupied the common area in a state of siege mentality. Food was brought to us from the dining facility. Patricia had been allowed one escorted trip to prepare supplies. We didn't leave the common area except to use the bathrooms, and even that required a stated intention. Chen didn't forbid it, but the implication was clear. Leaving was dangerous. The footsteps continued throughout the day. We could hear them moving through the building above us, below us, in the walls. The wind sound intensified. The building began to develop creaks and groans that had nothing to do with thermal cycling. Sometimes it sounded like something was trying to push through the walls. No one spoke about Amendment Rule 6 anymore. We violated it constantly, discussing what we could hear, trying to make sense of the sounds, trying to prepare mentally for whatever might happen. It's learning the building's layout, David Chen said. It's treating this like a spatial puzzle. It's trying to map us, Foster added. It's trying to understand where we are, what we do, when we move. Why doesn't it just break through? Patricia asked. Why this prolonged process? Because the rules contain it, I said, and everyone looked at me. The rules create a boundary that it can't cross directly, so it's trying to understand the boundary. It's trying to find the exception, the weakness, the moment when the boundary breaks. Chen was listening from across the room. She didn't contradict me. On December 22nd, at approximately 2 p.m., the building shuddered. It was a violent movement, like the entire structure had been struck by something massive. Dust fell from the ceiling. The lights flickered. A sustained low-frequency sound moved through the building, felt more than heard, a vibration that set the teeth on edge. Then silence, complete silence. The footsteps stopped. The wind sound stopped. Even the normal ambient sounds of the station, the radiators, the ventilation, the electrical hum seemed to pause. What was that? Patricia whispered. No one answered. We sat in the silence, waiting for something to happen, for the sound to resume, for the entity to break through. It didn't. After perhaps 30 seconds, the normal background sounds resumed. The radiators began their familiar cycle. The ventilation clicked back on. The electrical hum returned, but the footsteps didn't. At 4 p.m., Chen stood and went to the door connecting the common area to the rest of the station. She unlocked it, the electronic lock clicking open with a soft beep. "I'm going to check the building," she said. "No one follows me. You remain here. I'll return within 1 hour." "Dr. Chen," Foster began, but she was already gone, closing the door behind her. The hours stretched. We didn't talk. We sat in the common area and waited. The clock on the wall moved with agonizing slowness. Chen returned at 4:58 p.m. She looked shaken. Her face was pale, and her hands trembled slightly as she locked the door again. "The building is clear," she said. "The entities have withdrawn." "Where did they go?" Keiko asked. "I don't know," Chen said. "But they're no longer in the accessible areas of the station." She didn't elaborate. I didn't ask her if she'd seen James, or if she'd checked Sector D, or if she'd found anything that explained the impact we'd felt. That evening, at 6 p.m., Chen made the radio check. Her voice was steady. "Mount Kelsey repeater. This is Station Alpha, 6 p.m. report. All clear." Response: "Station Alpha, Mount Kelsey, 6 p.m. report confirmed. All clear." The signal was perfect. No distortion, no degradation. December 24th was quiet. The solstice window was officially closed. We were released from lockdown at 8 a.m. Movement through the station was again permitted, though Chen requested that all personnel avoid entering any areas that weren't part of normal rotation. The knocking on my door didn't return that night. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night without disruption. At 4:20 p.m., we conducted the inventory. The count came back at 38. The one missing item was not recovered. "The loss is acceptable," Chen said, signing the inventory form. "Stable systems moving forward." Over the next 5 days, through the new year, normalcy reasserted itself with surprising completeness. The atmospheric data stabilized. The pressure readings returned to normal oscillations. Particulate concentration dropped back to baseline plus 5%. The temperature settled at a consistent minus 28 Celsius. The knocking ceased entirely. The footsteps in the building stopped. The wind sound dissipated. The sense of presence that had pervaded the station for weeks evaporated. It was as if the solstice crisis had been a singular event, a pressure valve that had opened, released something, and then closed again. On January 2nd, I was working in the laboratory when Foster appeared at the doorway. "I'm putting in a request for early rotation," he said. "Chen will approve it in the spring. I'm requesting evacuation by helicopter at the next supply run in February." "What happened?" I asked. "What did Chen find when she left us?" "Nothing she's going to tell us," Foster said, "and nothing we need to know. The rules did what they do, they kept us alive. The solstice is the threshold. Everything intensifies, and then it either kills you or it passes. You survived it. That's what matters." "What about Marcus?" "Chen will rotate him out early too," Foster said. "He's broken. The psychological damage from isolation combined with exposure to the phenomena has made him unable to function. He'll be evacuated when the supply helicopter arrives." Foster left without saying goodbye. I continued my atmospheric analysis, documenting the post-solstice data, watching the readings stabilize, noting the precise moment when the station returned to a functioning research facility rather than a siege location. The second half of January brought the beginning of daylight's return. The sun didn't rise, it wouldn't for another month, but the twilight period extended. The sky went from absolute black to deep blue to lighter blue, a gradual gradient that marked time's passage in the Arctic. Keiko and I began planning field expeditions to check the external sensor arrays. We needed to understand why they'd gone completely dark during the solstice crisis. Visual inspection of the equipment might reveal physical damage. "Whatever happened," Keiko said, reviewing the data with me, "the phenomenon centered on the station. The external readings went to 0 during the crisis, which could mean either the sensors failed or the measurement environment became impossible to quantify." "What was it measuring?" I asked. "Before the crisis?" "Atmosphere," Keiko said, "or something that moves like atmosphere. something composed of particulates, pressure, temperature variations, all the components of air, but arranged in ways that shouldn't be possible according to conventional physics. On January 15th, Chen called me to her office for a formal review. "Your adaptation to station conditions is acceptable," she said, reviewing a document. "You've maintained protocol compliance, despite significant psychological pressure. Your work in the laboratory has been productive. The data you and Dr. Sato have collected will be valuable for the research." "What is being researched?" I asked. "What is this station actually studying?" "Climate," Chen said simply. "Atmospheric composition and environmental change in the climate, Arctic. That's what the consortium is funding and what we report." "But that's not all we're doing here," I said. "No," Chen agreed. "The secondary function is containment. We maintain this location because of the phenomena. We study it indirectly through the rules and protocols. We learn what boundaries keep us safe and what violations increase danger. We cycle personnel through to gather observations, and we ensure that knowledge of the phenomena doesn't spread beyond the research community." "What is it?" I asked directly. "What's inside Sector D? What comes through during the solstice? What are the things we heard?" "I don't have answers to those questions," Chen said. "I have protocols. I have rules. I have 18 years of accumulated knowledge about how to survive working at this location. That's all anyone gets. That's all anyone needs." She slid a new document across her desk. It was titled Station Operating Procedures Updated Edition, January 2025. "Read this," Chen said. "These are the procedures you'll work under for the remainder of your rotation. Some rules have been refined based on seasonal data. You'll notice the amendments have been integrated into a clean version. This is the document we'll leave for the next rotation." I took the document and began to read. The original 14 rules and the 6 amendments had been consolidated. New rules had been added, 3 emergency protocols had been expanded to 9. The rationale section had been updated with cumulative seasonal data. One new rule stood out. Between December 20 and January 5, the station operates under permanent lockdown protocols, regardless of administrator discretion. All personnel remain in designated safe zones during this window, regardless of external conditions or apparent threat level. This is non-negotiable. Failure to comply will result in termination of employment and emergency evacuation, or, in extreme cases, isolation within the station until rotational departure. "You're making it permanent," I said. "Yes," Chen said. "The next rotation will be more prepared because we're putting this in writing now. The solstice is the threshold. The danger is real and measurable. We contain it through protocol." February arrived with the first genuine hint of returning daylight. The twilight period extended to 2 hours per day. By February 10th, the sun's upper limb appeared briefly above the southern horizon, the first time since October that anything resembling direct solar radiation reached the station. The supply helicopter arrived on February 12th. Marcus was evacuated with medical assistance. Foster also departed. 2 new personnel arrived to replace them. A botanist named Dr. Yuki Tanaka and an equipment specialist named Thomas Wright. Keiko and I conducted the first external survey expedition on February 15th. The weather was clear, -28 Celsius, with light winds. We traveled to the first sensor array, 2 kilometers northeast of the station, and found the equipment intact but coated heavily in frost. We conducted a full diagnostic. The equipment responded to testing. We replaced batteries and reset the system. It came back online with readings that immediately matched the internal sensor streams. "No physical damage," Keiko said, documenting the inspection. The equipment functioned normally despite the complete signal loss during the solstice period. Whatever happened, it was environmental, not mechanical. We visited the second and third arrays. Both showed similar results: intact equipment, full functionality, no damage. The fourth array, located 5 kilometers northeast near the boundary surveyor's marks, was the same. "It's like the sensors never went dark," Keiko said as we traveled back to the station. "Like that entire event was localized to the station building itself." "Maybe it was," I said. "Maybe the phenomenon is contained within the structure. Maybe the rules don't protect us from something outside. They protect us from something inside that wants to get out." The idea settled between us. We didn't discuss it further. By late February, the rhythm of the station had become familiar enough that the rules seemed almost ordinary. Yes, we couldn't go outside at night. Yes, we maintained strict inventory procedures and radio protocols. Yes, we monitored atmospheric conditions with obsessive precision. But these were simply the operating procedures of our workplace. The fear had receded. The solstice crisis seemed almost unreal, a hallucination brought on by isolation and darkness. I was learning the dangerous seduction of routine. March brought steady daylight increase. By March 10th, the sun was above the horizon for more than 12 hours per day. The landscape transformed from pure white and black to shades of gray and pale blue. The stars, which had been brilliantly visible just weeks ago, began to fade as the sky brightened during night hours. The atmospheric data remained stable. Keiko's permafrost analysis was producing interesting results. The core samples showed evidence of recent melting and refreezing, suggesting rapid temperature fluctuations that might correlate with the solstice phenomena. "This is significant," she said, showing me the analysis. "The ground is recording changes in atmospheric temperature that go beyond normal seasonal variation. The permafrost is responding to some kind of temperature pulse." "During the solstice?" I asked. "The evidence is consistent with a thermal anomaly occurring around December 23rd, Keiko said. "The ground shows a melting profile that corresponds to a temperature elevation that lasted approximately 8 hours. We compiled this data into a report and submitted it to Chen for transmission to the consortium. She reviewed it, made a few notational corrections, and approved it for sending. At 6 p.m., Chen transmitted the report via encrypted channel to the consortium's central office. The radio check confirmed receipt. "They're analyzing it," Chen said. "It will take weeks before we hear anything back. The data will be processed, reviewed, and cross-referenced with data from other Arctic research stations." "What do you think they'll conclude?" I asked. "That the station is measuring real phenomena that require investigation," Chen said. "They'll probably increase funding and expand research parameters. Someone, eventually, will ask to open Sector D and examine what's stored there. I'll refuse, and that's where it will end for several years until a new director arrives who's willing to challenge my authority. And then, Chen said, someone will go into Sector D. They'll see something. They'll understand that opening sealed rooms is dangerous. They'll reseal it. The cycle will repeat. By April, I had been at the station for 6 months. Half my rotation was complete. The remaining 12 months stretched ahead of me, but the end was visible, conceptually possible. The darkness, which had seemed absolute during January, now felt like something we'd survived rather than something that would consume us. The knocking never returned. The footsteps in the walls never resumed. The sense of presence that had permeated the station during the solstice crisis had not come back. Whatever had pushed against the boundaries of the rules had receded, repelled, or satisfied, or simply withdrawn until the next pressure point. I maintained my protocols perfectly. I checked windows, logged inventories, conducted radio checks, remained within safe zones during designated hours. I followed the rules not out of fear anymore, but out of habit and understanding. The rules were the boundary between functioning and non-functioning. The rules were the framework that allowed us to work at the station without being destroyed by it. One evening in late April, I was returning to my quarters after dinner when I passed through the third-floor corridor where the knocking used to come to my door. On impulse, I stopped at my door and placed my hand against it. "I'm still here," I said quietly. I maintained the boundaries. I survived. There was no response, no knocking, no voice. The corridor was silent. The door was just a door. May brought the beginning of endless daylight. The sun no longer set. It circled the horizon, dipping low at midnight but never disappearing below the edge. The landscape was transformed: white snow, blue sky, shadows that rotated rather than lengthened and shortened. The atmospheric data showed normal seasonal variation. The laboratory work continued. The inventory counts remained stable at 38 items. The rules persisted, but most of them had become subordinate to the new rhythm of endless daylight. Rule 1: no exterior access between 6:45 p.m. and 8:15 a.m. became almost irrelevant. Exterior access was now theoretically available 24 hours per day. Chen adjusted the rule for summer operation. Exterior work could proceed during daylight hours, defined as 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., with full daylight lasting from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. The window covering ritual ceased. Rule 2 was suspended during daylight season. The south-facing window could remain uncovered. The second-floor corridor window could be left open. The restrictions eased because the threat had receded. During the polar night, when the darkness was complete and the temperature was lowest, the boundaries had to be absolute. During the daylight season, when the landscape was visible and the environment was less extreme, we could operate with more freedom. It's seasonal, I realized. The phenomenon is seasonal. It's most active during the solstice period, when the day-night cycle is most extreme. During polar daylight, it retreats or becomes dormant. Foster, during his final week before evacuation, had told me something similar. The phenomena follow the sun, he'd said. They're not caused by human occupation or activity. They're caused by something in this place that responds to the seasonal cycle. During winter darkness, it emerges. During summer light, it retreats. We're just trying to survive the emergence period. By June, it was clear that the station had returned to a normal research facility. The threat had passed. The crisis was over. We were just scientists doing work in a remote location. But I kept the message I'd found carved under my bed frame, and I kept reading the updated procedures document, and I kept perfect compliance with the rules, even the ones that had become obsolete during summer, because I understood what the previous occupant of my room had understood. The rules don't just protect us during the crisis. They keep the crisis from returning. Follow the rules, and the phenomenon retreats. Break the rules, and it emerges. The boundary is permanent, but it requires constant maintenance. It requires perfect compliance. It requires people willing to accept isolation and restriction in exchange for safety. I was that person now. I would be for 12 more months, and then someone else would take my place, and I would leave, and the cycle would continue. By September, with only 3 months remaining in my rotation, the station had fully returned to regular operations. The sun had lowered in the sky again by late September. It was setting for a few hours per night. The landscape was beginning to show subtle color, changes, browns and reds beneath the white snow, signs of approaching autumn. The knocking never returned. The footsteps never resumed. The entities that had manifested during the solstice remained absent, contained or dormant, or relocated to wherever they retreated when the daylight returned. On October 1st, exactly 1 year after my arrival, I stood in the third-floor corridor and looked out the south-facing window at the tundra landscape. The sun was setting earlier each day, darkness was returning, and the temperature was dropping back toward the extremes. Another rotation was about to begin. Another cycle of the polar night, another solstice season, another period of maintaining boundaries and following rules. Keiko found me at the window. "Ready for round 2?" she asked. "As ready as anyone can be," I said. "It gets easier the second time," she said. "You know what's coming. You know the rules work. It's not the terror of the unknown anymore. It's just endurance. Have you decided to stay?" I asked. I'd heard rumors she was considering extending her contract. "1 more rotation," she said. "Then I'm done. 8 months more, and I'm out. I'm going to finish my data analysis and then disappear into a university somewhere warm and boring." "Will you tell people?" I asked. "About what happens here?" Keiko smiled sadly. Who would believe me? And Amendment Rule 6 forbids it anyway. I'll have a stack of research papers on Arctic atmospheric anomalies, and I'll have a story I can never tell, like everyone who works here. She walked away, leaving me at the window. That night, I prepared my handover document. I was compiling a clean copy of all the procedures, all the amended rules, all the protocols that had evolved over 2 rotations. I was creating the document that would be left for the next person, the next scientist who arrived desperate for work and unaware of what they were walking into. I wrote the rules. I documented the timeline. I described the inventory procedures and the radio checks and the window coverings. I noted the seasonal variations and the equipment specifications. I created a comprehensive manual for surviving the station, and I added one thing that wasn't in the official procedures. At the end, on a separate sheet that would be placed under the bed frame in room 237, I wrote, "They learn you. Never open. Rotate out or break. Choose one. You can survive this. The rules work. Follow them perfectly. Do not deviate. Do not break boundaries. Do not attempt to understand what is happening. Just follow the procedures, count the minutes, monitor the rules, and endure. 7 more months after this. You can do it. And then leave. Get out. Don't extend your contract. Don't stay for a second rotation. Leave and never come back. The Arctic is beautiful, but it's not meant for us. We can visit. We can work. We can maintain our boundaries and collect our data. But we cannot stay. Not really. Not for long. Leave when your rotation ends. Pass this information to the next person, and don't look back. David Park, the 1st of October 2025. I folded the note and placed it under the bed frame in the exact position where I'd found the previous message. I fitted the cover back over it, obscuring it from casual view but leaving it there for someone to find. Then I returned to work. The October daylight was fading. The temperature was dropping. In a few weeks, the knocking would return. The footsteps would resume in the walls. The rules would tighten and bind. The boundaries would become absolute again. But I knew the boundaries held. I knew the rules worked. I knew that if I maintained perfect compliance, I would survive. And in 7 months, when the supply helicopter arrived and the rotation ended, I would leave. I would hand over the station to the next occupant. I would pass on the procedures. I would descend into the helicopter and rise above this place and not look back. The Arctic would continue. The phenomena would continue. The station would continue. But I would not. That was enough. That was survival. I checked the window covering at 7:35 p.m., exactly as the rule required. The aluminum shutter descended with a click, sealing out the polar night the barrier held. Tomorrow I would check the atmospheric sensors. Tomorrow I would conduct the inventory. Tomorrow I would make the radio check. Tomorrow I would follow the rules. But tonight I would sleep, knowing that the boundaries were maintained, that the protocols were sound, that the rules would hold until dawn came again, and that, after 7 more months of perfect compliance, I would be free to leave this place behind. The Arctic was horrifying, but I was learning how to survive its horror. That, I was beginning to understand, was the real work of the station. Not the climate research, not the data collection, not the atmospheric measurements. The real work was surviving, teaching others to survive, maintaining the boundaries that kept us alive. Everything else was just procedures to structure the survival. I closed my eyes and waited for the darkness to settle completely. In 7 months, I would leave. Until then, I would follow the rules. The boundaries would hold, the station would persist, and the Arctic, for a little while longer, would remain contained.